So let's start. I would like to begin by greeting everyone and expressing how pleased our small organizing committee is to have you all here today for our roundtable discussion. Secondly, we would like to express our gratitude to our invited guests for agreeing to share their perspectives on the theme of this roundtable. This small organizing committee, just for you to know, consists of Professor José Sousa from the Technical University of Setúbal, Luís Neves from the Technical University of Leiria, and myself, retired from the University of Coimbra. We are all senior researchers at the Institute for Systems Engineering and Computers at Coimbra, and we decided to organize this roundtable. Well, our satisfaction in having you all here today has an additional strong reason. We have been dedicating ourselves to stimulating the discussion of themes that are not appropriately currently mainstream, I mean. We think, nevertheless, that these themes that we have been dealing with haven't quite been thoroughly dissected when the time was appropriate for that purpose. The course of events has somehow obliterated the discussions that could have helped to define roadmaps to the desired energy transition and to sustainable development. And well, today's theme, utility-driven demand-side energy efficiency, which market structure is more effective, is one such case of a theme outside the mainstream. Strategic conservation, as it was designated in the 80s, is one of the well-known 6 low diagram objectives of demand-side management. Under this goal, utilities carry out and use energy efficiency programs in accordance with regulatory requirements and guidelines. Demand-side management flourished, especially in the USA in the 80s and early 90s, allegedly saving enormous amounts of money of avoided investments. During the early phases of market liberalization, most demand-side management programs were abolished under the guise of economic efficiency. This trend was eventually reversed in some way to address the long-term overall benefits of encouraging the end-use energy efficiency. However, the question remains, can liberalized markets really deliver energy efficiency as effectively as vertically integrated utilities? That is why we think that this is a timely debate, as the energy transition requires democratic exchange of views, receptiveness to diverse perspectives, and the consideration of all viable options for a sustainable future. As we all know, today we have 3 distinguished guests to help us discuss this question. I would begin with Jan Rosenow. Well, Jan Rosenow is one of Europe's leading authorities on energy and climate policy, with a particular focus on energy efficiency, electrification, and clean heat. He is Professor of Energy and Climate Policy at the University of Oxford, where he leads the energy program at the Environmental Change Institute, and a Jackson Senior Research Fellow at Oriel College, Oxford. He is also a senior associate at the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership at the University of Cambridge. His career path is unusual and not traditional, blending 2 decades in the private and non-profit sectors with academia. Jan advises governments and international organizations, including the World Economic Forum, United Nations, World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, and the International Energy Agency. And in 2025, he was invited to brief all 27 European Union members, energy ministers, at a formal European Council debate on industrial electrification. His work has shaped major energy and climate policies and is widely cited in global media, including the New York Times, The Economist, Forbes, and the BBC. In recognition of his impact, he was named the most read-through leader on the energy transition in 2024. Joísa Dutra. Well, Joísa Dutra has a PhD in economics from Fundação Getúlio Vargas in Rio de Janeiro, which she obtained in 2001. And she was director of the National Electric Energy Agency, ANEL, as it is well known in Brazil, between 2005 and 2009. She was a visiting professor at Harvard Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University in 2010, and she currently is a professor at Fundação Getúlio Vargas in Rio de Janeiro. She has experience in economics, working mainly in the areas of regulatory economics, energy economics, auctions, experimental economics, and organizational theory and contracts. She has been director of the Infrastructure Regulation Center of the Fundação Getúlio Vargas since 2010. Well, finally, Steve Nadel. Well, Steve Nadel is a senior fellow at the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, a nonprofit research organization that works on programs and policies to advance energy efficient technologies and services. Well, the ACEEE, as it is well known, is a very familiar organization to the energy efficiency community, as likewise, Steve Nadel also is a very familiar personality to this same community. Until recently, he was ACEEE's executive director for 24 years. Steve has over 40 years of experience in the energy efficiency field and over 200 publications on energy efficiency subjects. Well, I would say thank you all once more for your availability to be here with us. As previously agreed, each of our guests will make an initial statement as an introduction to the debate. The audience will then have the opportunity to ask questions, share comments, and express opinions, which our guests will kindly address, we hope. So, as previously agreed as well, I will give the word to Jan Rosenow to be the first one to address the audience. Please, Jan.
Thank you, Antonio. And sorry for the light. The evening sun has just come through my roof light, and if I open the window, the camera is completely obstructed and it's too bright. And if I close it, you can barely see me because it's too dark. So I don't want to move to a different position. Apologies for that. But I hope that it's more interesting what I say than what the lighting looks like in my face. So this is a really important topic. And for a very long time, and I think that's still the case today, has been an overemphasis in regulation and energy policy to focus on energy supply, in my view, and building capacity, generating electricity, supplying gas and other energy sources, and building the infrastructure. And that's all, of course, absolutely critical and fundamental, but there's been an underemphasis on demand-side solutions, such as energy efficiency, but also flexibility. And I think what we talk about today is to really think through how regulation and energy policy can encourage utilities to also deliver a demand-side solution in addition to supply-side solutions. So that's, I think, my initial observation. And this approach goes back, and Steve will talk about the US experience later. It goes back actually to the energy crises in the 1970s. If you read back on the history of utility demand-side programs, they actually start in the 1970s. After the crisis in 1973, there was an intense discussion about demand-side management coming out of the US. California, in particular, has been in the driving seat in that regard. And people in the audience probably know Amory Lovins, who coined the term negawatt and soft energy pathways. But there was a senator at the time in California who was playing a critical role in changing legislation in California to allow demand-side solutions to play a more important role. So it goes back a long time. And I mean, funnily enough, we're again in an energy crisis right now. And I again think that energy demand is not getting proper consideration. Most of the discussions focus on supply diversification, as the new term is now, but very little is being talked about the ability to reduce energy demand or be more flexible with energy to reduce dependence on fossil fuels. So there's a bit of a déjà vu moment here for those who followed the history for a very long time. You're going back now pretty much exactly 50 years, a bit longer actually. So in terms of the history, the first programs of this kind were established in the US as I said. And the names of those programs have changed. I'm sure, Steve, you will talk about that in your presentation. I'm not going to go into that here, and also the logic of these programs. But that's where they originate from. And in the 1980s, the first European governments got interested in this, and this is where I did my doctorate on these energy efficiency programs at Oxford back in 2009, and I found documents that showed that the UK government actually travelled to the US to study what's going on there, and the UK government was the first European country in 1994, after an initial pilot, to implement an energy efficiency obligation, or what they called a supply obligation, which required utilities to deliver energy savings at end-use customers. And that never existed in Europe up until that point. Then Denmark followed shortly afterwards, and a number of other countries, France and Italy, and Belgium for a brief period of time as well. And after about 2012, I think it was, the Energy Efficiency Directive in Europe then really led to a proliferation of this instrument. At some point, 16 countries out of 28 member states in Europe had energy efficiency obligations, and that number has not dramatically changed until today. It's been roughly around 15 or 16 countries for most of the time. So that's sort of the history when it comes to Europe and the US. But we also, and this goes back to a review that I carried out for the International Energy Agency 10 years ago, we also find these schemes in other geographies. Australia, for example, in the different states, has had what they mainly call white certificates programs, tradable white certificates, where energy savings are being traded between utilities and with market actors. But also China has experience with these programs, and South Korea, in Latin America, Brazil, and I'm sure my esteemed colleague will talk about that later. Brazil has quite a long history with this type of instrument. And there are other nuggets where it's been used, but it's really been used globally. I mean, you could also say South Africa, if you take a fairly wide definition, have used this instrument in the past, but it's become a global policy, really. And that's I think interesting to understand when you look at the origins going back to California in the early 1970s, where this idea I think first originated. Perhaps just a few numbers might be useful. So globally, roughly speaking, about 50 countries and states, regions have implemented this instrument. The numbers change every year because there's always a few that decide to maybe terminate, or there's a few that start a new program. But roughly 50 has been the number, I think, that's been fairly stable over the years. There have been detailed evaluations of these policies, and they consistently show that the cost of the savings delivered by utilities tend to be significantly lower than the cost of energy supplied in the different localities. And that means both electricity and gas, those are the main fuels. There are some exceptions where also things like heating oil are covered, and other fuels, propane. But that's gas and electricity are the main fuels because they're networked. And the obligations tend to lie on either the suppliers of energy or the network operators. It's a bit more complicated in the US context, where you have still quite a few vertically integrated utilities, and that's also the case in a number of other jurisdictions. But both work. I think I'm often asked, what is better? Should we, and I'm sure we come back to that in the roundtable, should we place obligations on the supply side, on the supplier, people who have customer contact, or the network operators? And my answer has always been, well, there isn't really a right or wrong answer here. It depends very much on the design and on the context. There's pros and cons for both. A regulated network operator has an embedded incentive to improve efficiency if the network regulation is set up well, but the suppliers have the end customer connection and have an incentive to engage with their customers. So there isn't really a right or wrong answer here. I think the track record shows that they both can work pretty well if designed well. And maybe the last few seconds, I have about 90 seconds left. I spent a bit on the design features because, yeah, mentioned about 50 programs exist globally. They're all very different. They differ in terms of the scope, which sectors they cover. They differ as to how they set the targets. Yeah, they could be set in annual savings or lifetime savings. Then it gets pretty technical pretty quickly. They can be set in carbon targets or also in energy targets. There are now some jurisdictions, I think Texas, so Steve will get into this as well, have peak load savings now, encouraging a reduction of peak load, not just energy savings. And then when it comes to evaluation of these programs, the quality of those differ vastly. The monitoring requirements will be very, very different depending on the jurisdiction. And also the enforcement of the rules will not be consistent. And then there's a question around tradability of certificates, if there are any. Again, there's quite a few countries that have experimented with white certificates. Some do not have that, as in fact the majority of programs do not have white certificates. Are they useful? Are they not useful? Again, it depends very much on how is it designed, but the evidence that I have seen does not suggest significant cost effectiveness improvements if you have tradable certificates. Maybe I stop there. That was a lot of information, but I'm sure the other speakers will come back to some of this and provide more detail and more nuance. But I hope it gave you just a bit of a sense of the history, the overall landscape of what this looks like globally, and some of the differences between the programs. But there's so much to unpack, and I'm out of time. So I hope the other speakers will give us add some more layers on top of what I just started to scratch the surface on. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Jan. It was very insightful. So just proceeding, I will give the word to Joísa, if you like. Thank you. No, sorry, to Steve. Sorry, we agreed. Steve should be second. Sorry. Okay, Steve, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you, Jan. And I'm going to pick up on what you were saying. I'm primarily going to talk about the U.S. experience, a little bit about Canada as well. But as Jan pointed out, began in California in the 1970s. Another place in the 1970s where it spread out of California was New Jersey and Pennsylvania, after the 3 Mile Island reactors nearly melted down. They had a shortage of power, and they frantically ramped up some energy efficiency programs. Gradually through the 1980s, more and more states, more and more utilities started these programs, and they were growing steadily. Sometimes utilities did it because it was the least cost resource. Sometimes they did it because the regulators requested it or even ordered it to happen. Then in the 1990s, early 1990s, there was a deregulation push and saying, well, we just need to leave it to the market. And what happened in the US is only some states did that, but then legislators got involved and said, well, we want to make sure we have a certain minimal level of energy efficiency. So they started setting targets that the distribution companies would need to reach in terms of energy savings. And as I'll talk about in a minute, about half the US states now have such targets. So since the 1990s, it's mostly either legislated or regulator set targets that people need to meet. And I'll go into a couple of details in a second. I would also note that, as Jan said, sometimes it could be at the supplier, sometimes at the distribution company. In the US, we almost always do it at the distribution company, but in some cases, it's the same company that generates and distributes. It's when they are separate, we almost always do it at the distribution company. I would note that Canada, it's primarily done by the utilities. They are often public utilities, crown corporations at different provinces. Although in a few cases, they do have private investor-owned utilities as well. Again, sometimes utilities do it at their own volition. Sometimes it's the regulators or the legislators who tell them that they should do it. With that, let me share my screen and show you a couple of maps and the like. And hopefully this shows up. Is that showing up?
Yes, it's perfect, Steve. Okay.
Great. Thank you. So this is a map of the United States showing that about half the states, it's actually 26 states now, have what we call energy efficiency resource standards, which are binding mandatory energy saving targets. And you can see they're all shaded. North Carolina has a mixture of energy efficiency and renewable energy. All the rest are just energy efficiency, and they may have separate renewable energy targets. The darker the color, the higher the target. So the very dark ones, the targets are more than 2% electricity savings per year from these programs. I would also note that in some cases, legislators pass these. Sometimes it's regulators, different approaches. Sometimes they set the actual targets. Sometimes it's a requirement to do all cost-effective energy efficiency, and the regulators review the proposals for that. We've done some work looking at how much different programs save. And there are some programs in the white states without energy resource standards, but the savings tend to be lower. Of the 25 states with the highest savings, only one, Utah with the star, does not have an energy efficiency resource standard. All the others have some type of mandated target. Another thing that is very helpful in the US is to have some type of performance incentives. Since the vast majority of utilities are investor-owned, it's over 70%, how can you give shareholders a stake in helping to hit the energy-saving target? So this shows some of the states that have these types of incentives. The blue, basically, they figure out what the net benefits are from an economic perspective, and the shareholders get some percentage of them. The orange, there's savings targets, and if they meet those targets, they get certain benefits. The yellow is people who have multiple targets that may be net benefits and energy savings and peak demand savings. And then in a few, they just let them put it into their rate base and earn a rate of return. Those are shown in green. So we see it as the targets are very helpful, but you also have to give them a financial mechanism to profit from this for it to work best. Now, one of the things that has come up, and I saw it in some of the roundtable questions for later, is, well, won't the private market do it? Why do we need the distribution companies and governments to tell them they must do? Well, in the 1990s, when we started deregulating, people said, okay, won't the private market just did this? So we did a study. It's a little old now, but in 2001, looking at that. And first we surveyed energy service companies. And at the top, you could see what types of markets do they serve. They tended to serve larger customers. Very few served residential and single family. So if you relied on them for services, you have to do something else, at least for residential, but even for some of the other sectors as well. We asked them, gee, should the utilities and other governments have supplemental support? And the vast majority, over 80%, said yes, it's extremely helpful for them. Likewise, at the same time, we surveyed retail power providers. And as you can see here, most of the people we surveyed do provide retail electric products. A few of them do limited information incentive, limited information and technical assistance, but the percentage that actually offered actual measures was on the order of 5 to 10%. Just at least in the US, by and large, the private market, unless they are required to do something, haven't stepped up. That said, when utilities are required to do it, they often will hire energy service companies and others, but it's the utilities and the regulators saying, we must hit these certain types of targets. And so those were a few of the points I wanted to make, and I look forward to the roundtable discussion. Oh, one other point, actually, I was going to say. One question comes up is, which is better? Do you have distribution? Do you have mandates, etc.? I think most important of all, and Jan kind of implied it, is you need good, motivated people to want this to happen. I've seen great programs with motivated people with every one of the possible models. I've seen lousy programs with every one of the models because people are not really motivated to succeed, or they put their worst people, not their best people. Number one, it's people. Then you can think about the model, which is probably secondary in my view. But I welcome during the roundtable other people's comments on that.
Well, thank you very much, Steve. Now, please, Joísa, it's your turn. Thank you. And sorry for mixing those things a few minutes ago. Okay.
No worries. So thank you for the invitation. So considering the last comment from Stephen and also Jan's presentation, I would start by saying that the answer, or in my view, the answer to the question, which model is better, is connected to the economic experience. It depends. Yes, and so this is what I'd like to go through here in my comments. So firstly, the question on the poster, so vertically integrated, the utility or the unbundled liberalized chain, is a question we have been asking ourselves and arguing over the years in the regulatory community. But over the last 2 decades, following closely the regulation of electricity distribution concessions in Brazil, I have come to believe that this is not the question to put first. The structural debate is downstream of a more decisive one. What obligations do we write in contracts? So I'm talking about the experience of an emerging economy that has not gone all the way in the liberalization reform. And so my core claim is that the market structure neither guarantees nor disqualifies effective demand-side energy efficiency. In turn, the regulatory compact has a major influence. So each side of this debate has a textbook story, the integrated utility. And by the integrated here, I mean a utility operating in a non-fully liberalized market, providing network services and also procuring energy on behalf of the user. This is the experience of Brazil and several other countries in Latin America that have followed the liberalization prescription, but not fully, offering then a single accountable agent, a billing relationship with every customer, and a regulator who can mandate spending and recovering those spendings through tariffs charged to electricity users. So this unbundled liberalized chain offers in turn competition to discipline costs, multiple actors innovating in parallel, and price signals that help reveal where efficiency is cheapest to procure. So both stories have well-documented failure and successful modes. The integrated utility faces an incentive. Every kilowatt hour saved is revenue foregone. So absent decoupling or a binding obligation, the utility quietly underinvests in efficiency. This is still the case in Brazil. So the empirical question then is not which structure is theoretically superior, rather which regulatory compact has produced durable, deep and equitable efficiency outcomes. And what do those compacts have in common across very different market structures? So I do not intend to dig into the successful or not so successful experiences in the US or European countries, a theme that was already addressed to a certain extent by Stevens and Yan's contribution to the panel. Looking further into the Brazilian experience, I want to tell a story. So by looking at the rankings presented by presented annually by the ACEEE, this is what I call, so I'm not sure the proper way to refer to the ACEEE, to the council. So Brazil ranked 20th of the 25 largest energy consuming economies ranking. With a score of 35.5 out of 100, essentially flat from previous years. So we sit in the bottom quintile in the national effort dimension. And the most uncomfortable single number in the report is that our energy intensity went up instead of down, with a few other countries partnering in this trend. So instead of becoming more efficient, we have become less. And why is that? The major program underlying or guiding energy efficiency efforts is the Energy Efficiency Program, the PEE, that has channeled over the last 25 years, circa something between $2 and $3 billion in total. So the American Council does recognize this program as as also focusing on low-income users, effectively granting the country 2 of those 8 national effort points, but on the metrics that determine outcomes, we score 0 or close to it. So there is no binding national energy efficiency target. Only financing limited to loans for industry and street lighting, public energy efficiency spending ranks, of course, considerably higher than the numbers for other developed economies, say the US, South Korea, and even Germany. So this is exactly the diagnostic that this panel questioned. So what we have is an integrated utility delivery channel. There is a budget, but what is missing is a functional or well-designed regulatory compact. So still lack binding savings obligations. So we still lack a regulatory framework that decouples sales from revenues for the utilities, effective performance incentives, outcome-based measurements or for third-party delivery as well. So any meaningful economic value placed on the saved kilowatt hour. So this integrated structure, as I referred, is doing what is performing poorly, exactly because the compact is absent. So the guidance is for utilities to execute a budget rather than deliver energy savings, rather than focusing on the output or outcome. This is not a critique of the utility model. It is the textbook prediction of what happens when an integrated model operates without the design features that make integration work. So when the panel asks which structure is more effective, our data answers in a particular way, neither, until we have the right compact. But lastly, I want to focus on recent events. Changing the debate from slightly academic to a live regulatory design problem. So Brazil also underwent, as I mentioned, a restructure, or the beginning, the inception of a restructure of its power industry in the 1990s. It was incomplete. The reform came to a head due to a rationing crisis in 2001, 2002. But the privatization of electricity distribution was implemented in the second half of the 1990s. And as a result, 30-year concession contracts were granted, and these contracts are about to expire. So the government proposed or accepted pledges to extend these contracts for another 30-year term. And last Friday, May 7, the government held a ceremony to celebrate the extension of 13 out of the 20 contracts to had already been extended for these utilities. So, as I mentioned, the country has run a utility-driven energy efficiency program since 2000, funded by a wire charge on distribution revenues. And in the framework that is about to guide the utilities business model in the coming years, decades, we still follow the same framework. The renewal in turn is conditioned on adequate service provision. The new contracts, the adapted contracts, introduce new obligations to address major challenges from our time: resilience, how to deliver resilience to extreme weather events, how to ensure universal access even to vulnerable communities and also rural areas. Keep in mind that this is a country that already managed to connect more than 99.8% of its population, as well as a consumer-centric approach, efficiency targets for service restoration, prudent investment, and efficient management of total operational and capital costs. In effect, we are facing a once-in-a-generation rewriting of what a distribution utility is obliged to do. Yet, demand-side energy efficiency is not yet anchored in the renewal contracts in the way it should be. The decree or the legal and regulatory framework effectively opened the door. There are new clauses, new obligations, but still we have the program, the energy efficiency program, as a legacy wire charge program sitting beside a modernized concession, maybe not seizing the opportunity of adapting regulated contracts to the new utility business model. So it's not so. This is one example to illustrate the question in the poster. So it's not whether to keep the integrated utility or to liberalize it. It's what the adapted contracts, in the case that are being signed and that are going to rule services provision for the coming decades, will require reward and measure energy efficiency outputs. So just briefly, let me close with a few design principles that in my reading predict effective demand side efficiency that could be far better than market structure does. And that could be embedded either in the concession contracts that guide services provision, or maybe in other countries' supplier obligation. Firstly, we still have to go through an effective decoupling between regulated revenues and energy throughput if utilities are in charge of most of the energy efficiency efforts. Secondly, setting a binding technology neutral multi-year savings target. And another one, so just not to exhaust the discussion, effective incentives to invest in measurement, verification, and independent evaluation as seriously as a program could be. So to close, vertically integrated utilities can deliver efficiency when they are obliged under decoupled incentives and also under effective measurement of the any efforts dash programs outputs. But this example here shows that these obligations can poorly deliver energy efficiency if the contract incentives and guidelines do not address it. So this is what we are going through at this very moment, trying to adapt concession contracts that will be service provision for major utilities, but do not seizing the opportunity to properly address and guide incentives to deliver energy efficiency. Pause for discussion. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Joísa. Thank you very much to you all. It was a very insightful set of statements. Thank you very much. And I suppose that you gave us material for lots of questions that I hope the audience will be keen to ask or comments to come forward. So I open the floor to anyone who wants to speak. I mean, you don't strictly have to raise your hand. If you want to come in and say something, please do. If some people speak at the same time, we will arbitrate that very friendly. So it's all right. It's quite all right. Well, we have Antonio Martins raising the hand, nevertheless. So please go ahead. And if you want to share your face with us, it would be nice. Antonio Martins, are you listening to me? No, you just rose your hand by mistake, or? Okay. Anyone else?
Just to notice that if is everybody with the muted? So if anyone wants to speak, remember to unmute.
Unmute the microphone. Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. So, maybe we should start with some.
We have a question in the chat.
Oh, in the chat. Okay, nice.
Yes.
Okay. Oh, you were just clapping and not raising the hand. Okay, Antonio Martins, thank you. Thank you for your support anyway. We have a question to Joísa. Well, the person is in a library, so she cannot speak now. It's Rodolfo Castro. My question is not properly related to efficiency, but DSM, he says. Do you think the limits cap and floor on spot prices is preventing the adoption of DSM, at least from the free consumers? I don't know whether, well, the word is free because I have a small box on top of your message, so maybe you, at least from free consumers. I suppose, Joísa, you can read the chat as well, right? You have your microphone.
Apologies. Yes, I was on
Okay.
mute. So effectively, price caps, yes, in here referred to as the ones that prevail at the liberalized environment, contracting environment, could induce or inhibit incentives or mute incentives to engage in energy efficiency actions and efforts. But the question that we have faced there, I think, is not exactly connected to this. This is price formation that do not properly reflect the underlying costs.
Okay, well, thanks a lot. Any other questions from the audience? Please go ahead. We had lots of material here, so. Well, I believe that just to make a brief statement, if I understood correctly, the opinion of you three, that there is a common denominator, which is, as far as I understood, that it's not essentially important that we have vertically integrated utilities or the environment of a liberalized market, but regulation is the most important issue. right? So I believe that this is probably the common denominator, what you three told us. Anyway, I would like to refer to one particular point, one figure that Steve projected to us, which is the involvement of retailers, right? And that comes to my, well, opinion, or eventually my reasoning on the role of retailers, is that retailers, as I usually taught to my students, retailers were on a particularly difficult economic activity, which was, they saw their margins shrink to the minimum admissible. So the retailer business is not an easy business. And I guess that efficiency, or promoting efficiency at the demand side, is probably not exactly the main priority of retailers, unless they are obligated to do so. And in that particular case, how do you think that the obligation imposed on retailers on a fully liberalized market, the eventual imposition of energy efficiency obligations on retailers, do they have the potential to make the business completely impossible to carry through? What do you think? Anyone of you, our distinguished three guests? Okay, Jan, go ahead.
Yeah, I can probably take that. I mean, you will find programs that place the obligation on retailers that are very well designed and work and have worked for decades. I mean, there's not a perfect program, so please don't get me wrong. Any examples I name, they're not perfect examples or the worst examples. But I mean, the French white certificate program is placed on retailers, has been around for more than 2 decades now, and I think overall is seen as quite successful. It had its problems, but there were lots of reforms to make it better, make it stronger. But it's certainly not a failed program. Quite the contrary. It's become the most important energy efficiency policy in France, and has delivered billions of euros of investment in energy efficiency. But of course, there are also, I mean, I won't name the specific country for the worst performer, but in one instance, we had an obligation placed on retailers, and the penalty regime was such that it was much cheaper to pay the penalty than to deliver the program and deliver savings. And you can guess what happened. No savings were delivered, because if you're a rational market actor, and we assume that these companies are, because they have an obligation also to their shareholders to maximize profits and minimize any losses and costs. These companies have figured that out pretty quickly, and they didn't deliver any savings. So that's just one example of how you can design a policy pretty badly, and it leads to well, it doesn't have the intended outcome, but it has a very different outcome. But the general conflict that you point to, Antonio, is clearly there, right? If you're selling energy, why would you want to reduce your market share? But if the programs are designed well, and if the measures that are being rolled out are the right ones, we know from experience it can work. But there's a lot of ifs. You need to. I think anyone who wants to implement a system like that needs to really study what's already been done and learn the lessons, because there's a lot of mistakes that you can make along the way. But luckily, we have a lot of detailed reports that summarize that experience in great detail. And I would always study what's been done already and what works, what doesn't, before designing a program like this. This is complex. Yeah, it's not trivial, and I think therefore it warrants a really proper study.
Thank you very much, Jan. I would just like to further ask you a little bit a very tiny question, which eventually will be useful for the rest of the audience, which is, for this very successful program that you mentioned about incentivizing retailers to perform or to promote energy efficiency at the demand side. what is the nature of the revenues? How do they recover the costs, and how is that made so that the business doesn't shrink, doesn't wreck?
I see. Well, in a completely liberated market, liberalized market, you won't be able to get that information. It's just as simple as that, because the regulator does not get it, because the companies don't report to the regulator
Yeah.
on their
Okay.
profits, on their losses, unless you force them to. I mean, there have been instances where regulators have said, no, we actually want to know how much money you've spent. That is quite interventionist, or you have an evaluation that is carried out that monitors those costs. But we often don't know exactly how those costs are being absorbed by the obligated parties, and also how they're being passed on to customers. I think the most compelling explanation I have heard is that, well, I mean, these companies, they're often very large companies. They have a lot of different costs, different cost items, and they all use different approaches of how they absorb these costs and then bundle them up, and how they offer then a kilowatt hour rate and a standing charge to their customers. There's no formula that you can just look at and say this is how it works. It's really quite diverse. The business case, I think, is still there. You're passing on those costs through it's always socialized. In the end of the day, the customer pays.
Yes, of course, right. But that raises the question of competition between retailers. So it's kind of curious to look at that reality if it works so well. Yeah, right.
Right. I wanted to add on this. While we don't do very much with retailers in the US, as I pointed out, I am very familiar with some of the programs in Europe and Australia, white certificates, whether it's France, Italy, the old UK program, Flanders, etc. There is a tendency I have noticed, and I'd be interested in other people's opinion on that, for them to mass sell particular measures. They did lots and lots of compact fluorescent lighting or LED lighting. They've done, in the UK, they did a lot of cavity wall insulation. Now I'm seeing more smart thermostats. They do whatever is cheapest and try to sell it broadly as opposed to more custom. I know in Italy, they were able to manipulate the rules a bit to get a fair amount of industrial, but they had to manipulate the rules a bit. There's a tendency for these retailers to want to do it at the cheapest possible cost, as opposed to what is the long-term societal objective, which typically is how do we maximize long-term savings and minimize carbon emissions.
Well, I guess that raises the question on how does the retailer's activity contribute to, I mean, in net terms, to the energy transition goals, right?
Right. I would say it helps. It's just a question of does it help as much as some other approaches? You can at least have a debate about that.
Maybe, Antonio, if I could just very briefly add to what Steve said.
Yes, of course.
I mean, he's absolutely right. If you give retailers the absolute freedom to do what they want, they will find the lowest cost savings that are eligible under the program. And the light bulb example is probably the best known ones, where they just posted lots of light bulbs to people without ever checking that they were used. You could still argue that it helped with market transformation, even if those light bulbs never got used, because it meant they were in the shops and the industry ramped up, and ultimately that was a good thing. But that was recognized by the regulator. So what the UK regulator did in response was to basically say, no more lighting, guys. That's the end of it. You have to do other things now. And I mean, the UK program has now been terminated in March, actually because I think they went too far the other end. That's my personal opinion. The program became so targeted. It was mainly focused on low-income households and expensive measures such as solid wall insulation and other insulation measures, that it was getting quite difficult for the retailers, I think, to deliver this, and overly regulated and not enough space for innovation. But that's my personal view. But it ultimately led to the termination of the program, which is also, you got to be careful how much flexibility you give on the one hand and how much restriction you impose on the other. And there's not always a right or wrong answer, and some of it is experimentation in the market and see what actually happens, and then change the program as you go along and reform it every couple of years, every 3 years. I think that's another important lesson I think that we've learned. It's good to regularly assess and reform rather than design something and keep it for 10 years and never change it. Or change it every year. That's also not a very good idea.
Yeah, right. Well, that also raises the question of monitoring results, right? Because there are two main, there are eventually much more than that, but I was focusing on two main perspectives. One of them is issue some guidelines and let retailers do whatever they think it's best for them, or strictly define what is to be done and define upfront the monitoring procedures and the verification procedures of the savings and so on. And as far as I understand, although I don't know the realities as you do, Jan, but as far as I understand, it's probably much more difficult to have a clear conclusion on the results of the energy efficiency programs delivered by retailers, because as you mentioned, it's not strictly regulated because it cannot be, right? So I don't know. I mean, if when I raise the question of the energy transition and how that impacts the energy transition goals, my worry is that what I'm worried about is that if you have goals, I mean, general long-term goals in energy policy, then you should have all the streams that feed the main objectives that you've set to yourself. They should be well quantified, and you should know what is the real contribution of each one of those flows. And I suppose that we have a little bit of uncertainty, sorry, about the contribution of those components, right? I guess.
Is this a question to me, Antonio?
Yes, I mean, what is your opinion on that?
Yeah.
Because as you mentioned, a very successful program in France, I suppose, as you told, is that something that you can really quantify and assess the net result of that towards the energy transition goals?
Yeah, I think you absolutely can. It depends on the monitoring requirements.
Yes, of course.
So yeah, you can, and indeed the obligated parties usually are required to provide detailed reports, to have paperwork that proves that they've installed certain measures or provided support for certain measures. And then you have to do spot checks. I think that's the other lesson from the UK program. They used to do unannounced spot checks of the quality of measures, of the quantity of measures, and the paperwork trail and everything. But then they changed that, and that led to less compliance in this, which is a problem. So you have to get your monitoring regime up to a good standard, and then you can have confidence. But if it's a weak monitoring system, then you can be pretty sure that the outcomes are not very reliable. So it's not a given. You have to do it, but I think the same applies. I would say to some extent to network companies. If you have, even though they're regulated, if you don't enforce the regulation properly, then you have similar issues there too. So I don't think it's necessarily a problem for energy retailers.
Yes. Okay. Right.
Just a very brief comment. It's very important to quantify and to assess, and also to produce regular detailed reports, but also to make it clear, to make them understandable, yes, by a broader audience, to effectively help enforce them. For instance, the experience that I have described, in which we have it poorly designed, has been assessed through several reports, institutions, even international programs, and also funds from the UK Prosperity Fund. But so far, with very poor results in terms of changing or improving the design of a program. And so this is not limited to this experience. Often we live in this silos approach. And even though we have monitoring and assessing of program outputs, we fail to produce the change in a timely manner because we limit this knowledge to a more closed community.
Thank you, Joísa. That reminds me of something else. Well, your initial statement made me recall the ProCell. I mean, I suppose you were familiar with the ProCell program. How do you evaluate the results of that program? And do you think that the way its results showed up could give some light on the particular question that we raised on this roundtable discussion? I mean, the ProCell was carried out by a vertically integrated utility in Brazil, right? So it was a very standard program, so as far as I understood it at the time. How do you think that could help us in our discussion? I mean, the ProCell characteristics and results.
Yes, I think it illustrates my previous comments. The ProCell is a labeling program. Yes, and it is of essence that when we have labeling programs, yes, the standards evolve as the industry advances. And so the program has failed to induce more effective outcomes due to the lack of change in these standards over time as the industry evolved or could have evolved in advancing energy efficiency.
Mm-hmm. So you think that Eletrobras was not smart enough in order to make the ProCell work?
I think this is not an experience limited to this program. I had been part of a community under the World Economic Forum, the Global Future Councils, in which we have discussed assessment of energy efficiency programs, and I recall that very few jurisdictions, geographies could really be deemed successful in effectively adapting or setting standards that follow the advancements in the industry, in the ability of the industry to promote and to deliver energy efficiency. And so I recall that one successful example was in China, yes, in which there was sort of a competition for the ability of the industry to advance energy efficiency and connecting the adjustment over time of those standards, of those labels, to the ability of the industry to promote energy efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a best in class. Yes, like a best in class example.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Okay.
I wanted to pick up on your question about the energy transition. And if we are truly trying to have a transition, it's helpful to know where you're trying to go, what the barriers are to getting there, and then to have a set of interventions, not just a single intervention, to help address those barriers. So just to give an example, I know in Europe and the United States, there's a lot of work on heat pumps. So what's the role of labeling, and how do you do that to help get the information out there? What's the role of incentives? What's the role of regulation? All of them have a role. Are there certain things you want I'll call them utilities, whether it's distribution, retailers, et cetera, to do? Are there things government can do? But you need some type of conscious idea of how you're going rather than just say, tell us whatever you want and hopefully we'll get there.
Okay,
So,
well, thank you.
Apologies, but I have to leave due to another commitment. professional
Okay,
commitment.
thank you very much, Joísa, for
Thank-
your contribution.
Thank
We
you.
fully understand, and we only have to thank you for your
Thank you
contribution.
very much.
Thank you very much
Thank
as
you.
well.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye. So we've been monopolizing the conversation, but I think that the audience would eventually have some questions or comments on what has been said until now. I mean, both the initial statements and the discussion that we have had until now. So go ahead. We should have your contribution to this. Well, this is a very silent audience. I have another question that could eventually be interesting to discuss, although it is a bit based on history. Well, I accompanied very frequently the reality in the States, because I was witnessing all the movement in the utility sector regarding demand side efficiency from the early 80s, I mean, from mid 80s, more or less. And as far as I understood at that time, and this is eventually very well related to the theme of the roundtable discussion, those huge, eventually a bit exaggerated savings that the industry claimed to have been able to deliver with DSM programs were based on, as far as I understand it, on the fact that the vertically integrated structure allowed utilities to exactly know how the impacts of demand side efficiency propagated upstream up to the generation sector, because many of the savings that were claimed were based on abandoning some investment options that were in previous plans, generation expansion plans. And this particular, well, even in the present days, we have, as you know, in many parts of the world, including in the United States, many utilities which are vertically integrated, either investor-owned or state-owned, like the Tennessee Valley or others. And we have lots of utilities which are partially vertically integrated, those who distribute and also sell energy to end-use customers. This particular capacity of looking at the upstream effects of demand side efficiency on the economic performance of the companies or the utilities, do you think this is important from the point of view of the utilities being more perceptive, perceiving better the importance of demand side efficiency on their own business, or what is your opinion on this? Either of you.
I
Steve
can
or-
I can
Okay.
think respond to that. There's huge diversity. So there are network companies I've worked with that completely get it. They see demand side management as absolutely key. They commission detailed consultancy studies on how they can leverage that with geo-targeting in congested areas, for example. They work with a regulator to change the price incentives, the price control mechanism, so they can get a reward if they implement these kinds of measures. Those are the progressive forces. There are also people in the industry and companies that take the view that copper in the ground is what we know best. We don't want to work on demand side flexibility and these sorts of things because they're unpredictable, they're complicated, and basically it's about minimizing risk. We like the current model where we basically focus on capex, capital investment, and that's what we care about the most. So there's a lot of inertia, I'd say, and different countries, different regions, different companies are in different stages along this transition. Yeah, it depends where you look, I think is the short answer.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Right. And I will just add,
Mhm.
as I agree with Jan, some companies and their management are more open to looking at this. Some just say, I was trained as an engineer, and my job is to put, as he said, copper in the ground.
Yeah, right.
I would say, I remember, oh boy, it was a number of years ago, a stock analyst looked at investment returns for a whole bunch of utilities in the US and found that those that tended to do more efficiency on average did have slightly larger returns, but it was not like, oh, they doubled it. It was a statistically significant, but modest thing. Because remember, for US utilities, even those that are doing a lot of efficiency spending might be 3%, 4% of their expenditure. So you only get so much impact on your bottom line from it.
Yeah,
Certainly, as I mentioned before, having some type of shareholder incentives helps. But again, it's, for multi-billion-dollar companies, you're talking about extra returns in the millions, not the billions.
Yes, of course. I tend to remember the arguments of Clark Jellings, who said very frequently that, well, we don't do in the early days, we don't do the SM because we are philanthropic. We do the SM because it's profitable. Because it saves us lots of capex charges and so on. So they said, well, this is a business question. This is not a philanthropic approach to selling energy or whatever. So that's why I tend to think that in the early days, at least, the possibility of looking at the upstream effects of demand side efficiency promotion was very important for the decision makers in vertically integrated utilities when they had to decide on what type of investments they had to keep on their previous plans or just let them go because they were no longer needed. So this was interesting from the point of view of vertically integrated utilities. But as far as I understand, I would tend to consider that the main conclusion that we can draw from our discussion here and looking at our initial formulation of the question to the debate is that either way, you will be able to do very interesting things, although in some cases you will not be able to quantify them very precisely, eventually not be so able to say, well, this was X% important to this particular goal of the energy transition of our energy policy. But in any case, we should say that we could say that regulation determines mostly the results, and you will be able to get the results you want more or less precisely with a careful regulation. Then, well, if this is true, and I think that it's really the basic thing that we conclude here today, I think that it raises probably a derivative question from this, and it is there any difference in the easiness to implement things? I mean, in particular regulation, is there any difference in the facility with which you look at the regulation of activity from one structure to the other? I mean, is it more complicated to regulate in order to obtain the goals that you want in a liberalized market, or in an environment where you have an integrated utility or several of them? Where is it more difficult to regulate? In which one of the circumstances?
Steve, do you want to start?
Sure. I'm not sure one is easier than the other. It depends on the will of the regulators, what levers they have, which vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. There are opportunities for regulation in either approach. There are limitations in either approach. Then you also have to factor in regulation always involves a lot of politics. And what is the politics of the moment? So all of those, I'm not sure you can say, oh, one's always better than the other.
Okay.
I-
Well, wait.
If I
Sorry,
could
Jan.
just, yeah, that's
Sorry,
okay.
Jan. There is another issue that complicates the matter even more, which is it's different to regulate an investor-owned utility and a state-owned utility, right? So even when in vertically integrated fashion. Okay. Sorry, Jan. Go ahead.
No, I think again, there's no yes or no answer because let's take Germany is a good example, right? How many distribution companies are currently registered in Germany? It's hundreds of distribution companies. And then you take another extreme case where you have a single grid operator that is responsible pretty much for the entire grid of the country. So in one case, you're dealing with hundreds of entities, in some cases municipal entities, very small.
Right.
In another, you're dealing with one actor. The same goes for suppliers. You might have a situation where you have three big suppliers that dominate the market, or you have a lot of small suppliers. But there are ways around this. So if I remember this correctly, I think in France they found a way because they also obligated suppliers of heating fuels, if I'm not mistaken, and they found a way to then, rather than deal with the individual suppliers, to deal with the business association on their behalf. So they could, there was a workaround. But I guess what I'm saying is that it'll be nice to be able to say, oh, it's always easier to put it on the distribution companies or the supply companies, but I don't think it is. I think it is so context specific that you have to study the context first before you can answer the question. Sadly, it sounds like a lazy excuse not to answer the question, but I think it's the honest answer.
Okay. Well,
the world is messy. It comes in lots of flavors. There isn't a single answer.
That's right. That's what we conclude. Yeah. So I don't know.
We have a challenge in the chat. We have a
There's a
challenge.
then. Okay.
Yeah.
The chat says, well, it's Rita Martins from the Faculty of Economics of the University of Coimbra. She says, I would like to listen the opinion of the invited speakers regarding the eventual effects of energy efficiency promotion on the most vulnerable consumers.
Well, maybe I can start because the UK was the first scheme that put a lot of emphasis on fuel poverty or energy poverty, as it's called here. And there's my personal view is that programs should be as wide as possible in terms of customers, so everybody benefits, and you get system-wide benefits rather than be very narrow. And why is that? Well, if you target only a sub-segment of customers, you run into the problem of who is eligible and who isn't. And it's impossible to develop a metric that is fair because it always excludes people who should benefit from the program but then can't but pay for it in the end through their rates, through their bills. That's my view. There are people who will argue that if you have an energy bill funded program, it should be targeted towards those that fit a very narrow metric. I think that is problematic because there should be other programs like grant programs that are funded by the public budget that do this kind of thing, but not a program that is paid for by energy customers. These costs are socialized. The benefits should be distributed widely. That's my personal view. We got to make sure that these programs are cost effective in the long run. Because if they are, and if the cost, and we know that they are from evaluations, if the cost of saving energy is below the cost of supplying energy, and everybody benefits at some point, that lowers people's bills, and it's good for everybody, including customers who are vulnerable and are low incomes. So that's my view. There are many different views on this topic, but I've come to the conclusion that a wide applicability is better than a very narrow one, and as long as the programs are cost effective, they are going to benefit also vulnerable customers.
Okay, and why don't I add a little bit from the U.S. perspective? We increasingly are setting targets for services to low and moderate income customers. It's just one aspect. We're not saying just serve them. So in the US, roughly 1/4 of customers are low and moderate income, using the most widely used definition in the US. So we're basically often saying they should receive about 1/4 of the benefit of the programs. And it's not prescriptive. You will do this, this, and this, but you, as the program implementer, need to plan programs to make sure that these people qualify. And yes, you want to make it as easy as possible to verify who is and who is not without getting too bureaucratic. Like we often will say, if you qualify for any one of 10 different programs, you count. We're not going to ask your income every time. As long as you've done it once, you're in. But how do you make sure they do get served? Because if you don't have these requirements, we found these people are underserved. In other words, they're helping to pay for the services for higher income customers. But I agree with Jan, they need to ultimately benefit everyone. And we try to just say, we want to make sure that low and moderate income get their, quote, fair share.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And there is also the question of talking about low and moderate income customers, that when you look at the energy efficiency issue in those environments, you usually find situations where comfort is not enough. And when you try to look at look at the problem in an integrated manner, you tend to raise the quality of life of those people. And that means that even using efficient solutions for end users, you raise the consumption of those families or households, because if you want to raise the standards, and when you look at these problems from the social point of view, you inevitably look at these things, right? So I mean, there's no point in using non-efficient solutions when you try to raise the quality of life of households or families. But actually, in the end, you may end up raising the overall energy consumption on those sectors, right? So do you agree with this? Because this is something that we discuss very frequently here, because we have lots of low-income consumers in Portugal, for instance.
Right. I would say in the US, yes, some customers take the benefits in terms of improved comfort, either higher air conditioning in the summer, higher heating in the winter. But from the data I've seen, in general, the programs do continue to save, even if some portion, and it's usually a modest portion, is, quote, take back, if you will, in terms of improved comfort. But each jurisdiction is different, but generally they say we want to count the savings under, quote, normal situations, and we recognize that it's acceptable for some people to take this as improved comfort.
Okay, well, so we are approaching the scheduled times that we had for the end of this roundtable. I don't know whether there are any other questions from the audience, which was very shy today, unusually shy. But anyway, we had a few contributions anyway, and thank you very much for those. But if there are any other questions or comments that you want to make from the audience, I see several people here that I know that could eventually have strong opinions on things, but okay, they're shy enough today. I would eventually come to an end to the roundtable by again a big thank you to Stephen and Jan for staying with us until the end. Thank you very much for that, for your insights and for your very important opinions on this subject. I suppose that we all go today with a fresh view on this particular question. Which is very important for us, because when we raised the question, we were really, really interested in trying to find an overall answer to it. And I think we found it today, an overall answer, although we know that there are many details on the implementation of regulation for this particular matter. But I think that we all learned important things today. And this is due to your contributions, Stephen, Jan, and Joísa, of course. So, well, thank you very much for your patience and your availability to be with us today. Thank you very much for the audience, those who remained with us until now. And I suppose it's time to come to an end. And well, and I hope we see each other, everyone, frequently in the future. And thanks again very much to you all. And thanks from our research unit point of view as well, because this is our research unit initiative. And I mean, institutionally, it is important for us today as well. So thank you very much, Steve. Thank you, Jan, and thank you, everyone. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Okay, goodbye.